You hope. I got a countdown that's already at 31, so we'll see what we can do with that. Really grateful that you're here as we kick off a series that's very important that I've never done this way, and so I ask that you just be with me. I'm going to share a lot of story today about my experience in church and the importance that the church plays in the mission of our lives. Each and every one of us is called to a mission. And so just going to put it out there. Some of you, your mission is to attend the 9 o'clock service where there's more seats available. But, you know, just saying, it's up to you. So this morning, I'm going to start off with a quote. Have you ever had a quote that just stuck with you? Like someone said it, or you heard it, and you're like, okay, I'll never forget that. This quote happened roughly 14 years ago. The senior pastor of the church I was working at, he said in a staff meeting, and when he said it, I was like, that was stupid. He said this. He said, aim at nothing and you will hit it every time. And I think because I thought it was stupid, that it didn't make any sense to me, it stuck. And I had this great tension with it. Like, why would you tell me to aim at nothing? Like, this is just ridiculous. And I would think about it and process it, and I would ponder it, and then, days would go by, and I would be beyond it, and I'd forget about it, And then we'd be in our staff meeting, and he'd say it again. I'm like, hey, are you encouraging me to aim at nothing? Like, I don't, it just never made sense. And then, a few months later, I'm sitting in a staff meeting, and I have this gift. I believe it's a gift. My wife doesn't think it's a gift. But I can just tune everything out around me. I can just be sitting in a room full of people, and they're talking about something, and I am thinking about something completely different. It was a gift in school. I mean, to all you in school, it's not a gift, but it was I could just be thinking about something completely random, like what I was doing that day, or vacation, or my work, I could just be sitting there and someone's talking and I am just, it really is a gift because I can be driving a car and I have 4 kids and they can just be losing their minds and I'm just driving, So I'm sitting in a staff meeting one day and somebody's talking. It was there's probably 25 of us in the room, this is our full staff, and I had this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I get it. That quote or that statement that he's been saying over and again, like aim at nothing, you'll hit every time, it hit me. I think I might have audibly said, oh, that makes sense. I don't know what they're talking about, but it made sense to me, and that from that moment on, it inspired me. It inspired me to make sure that I always knew, God, where are you taking me? Because if you leave it up to me, if it's my choice, I'll end up somewhere I don't belong. If it's given the opportunity for me to choose, I'll aim everywhere. I want to do this and that, and I'll never get to where I need to be. And so as I process this quote, I want you to kind of think through it this morning. Aim at nothing. You'll hit it every time. The same is true for our church. If our church fails at achieving its mission, we're useless. We're worthless. We shouldn't be here. Close the doors, sell the building, go somewhere else. The mission is that important. And so as I think about church and mission, I have to look at my life. I grew up in church. I don't remember a time not going. My parents carried me from a baby carrier I remember preschool. My earliest memory is not someone teaching. It was the red cardboard bricks that you got to build when you were in preschool in the old Baptist church. They were the coolest things in the world because, to me, I could build, 10 high and I could create a castle. You couldn't see me, I could build them. And some of you were like, what are you talking about? You didn't grow up in an old Baptist church. You missed out on life. But I grew up doing that. And then I remember in my early elementary days, I remember sitting at a table and a man or a lady, they pull out this green board. No, it wasn't a green screen where you do videos in front of it generation now. It was this felt board that you would stick things to. And Jesus was like a little cutout, and little lambs and little things would stick on it. And they tell the story this way, and you're like, boring. I did it, okay? I grew up this way. I just think about the church, and it's always just been there. It's always been a part of my life. It's always had an influence on me. And I'll be honest with you, when I really think about my life, when I think about where I am today, I can just be honest with you and say, the church saved my life. It wasn't that I was a bad kid or that I needed this intervention. The church was always there to help me with prevention. It was always there to make sure that I knew what I needed to do. It was always there encouraging me to love or serve or give. It was always there reminding me that you're not here for yourself, Chris. The church was always reminding me that I had something to offer. It wasn't really until probably maybe 10 years ago that I began to understand just how impactful the church has been in my life. I had been working at this church in Alpharetta for 6 years, and I felt like God had released me. And you're like, what does that mean? I'm a dreamer. And so I've always kind of been at this place where, God, when my dreams stop, I know that you're preparing me for something new. Like you're going to transition, you're going to change, you're going to put me in a different place. And so I had literally run out of dreams. Like I was now just there functioning. And so I knew it was time. And in that season of kind of transition, I began to explore all options. Like, do I want to stay in ministry? You know, like, is it church? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? I'd always wanted to be a senior pastor or a lead pastor. Hadn't been that. And so like, I was just kind of asking God, what's next? In that season, my first real boss started coming to our church. I worked at Chick-fil-A for a few years. And he was there, and he worked for what we called the Dwarf House, which is now called Truett's Grill, if you've ever been like in Atlanta. It's a Chick-fil-A that you can sit down and order a hamburger. Yeah, you can't do that at your Chick-fil-A, can you? That's right. We served steak and baked potato. Oh man, I worked there. It was awesome, okay? This was the Chick-fil-A I worked at, and he is a corporately owned Chick-fil-A, and he is corporate, not individual. And so I started talking to him. I'm like, oh man, I could go work for corporate Chick-fil-A. And I started dreaming about how awesome that would be, like to not work on Sundays, to sleep in if I wanted to. Like that's why you're so special, because you could have slept in this morning and you came. Some of you actually did sleep in. That's why you're at this service. But nonetheless, I began dreaming. I could work at Chick-fil-A. I could go back to the corporate. In fact, Chick-fil-A is doing pretty good. You know, like financially, I could be set. You know, like, and I was dreaming, and I had this moment, and it was so interesting. It wasn't just me. Jamie, my wife, we had the same kind of moment, and it was this realization that maybe, just maybe, I needed the church more than the church needed me. It was this realization that the church had always played such a significant part of my life. It was the church that always drew me back to the life I knew I was called to live. And this morning, maybe you've felt the same way. If I'm honest, if I could just imagine my life without the church's influence, I know I would not be where I am today. I know I wouldn't be doing or thinking or caring the way I do today. The church has always poured into me, led me, cared for me in ways that kept me from going astray, like going off and doing my own thing. And so as I processed it, I began to think through the things that the church does. And it's important to understand the mission, because when you know the mission, you know what it kind of it'll do for you. And so this morning, I'm trying to lay out 4 things that the church consistently does. And I'm speaking big church. So maybe you're here this morning, maybe you're a church shopper. You've been going church to church to church. Awesome. Be plugged into a local church. Maybe you're trying this out and you're just experiencing it. Hey, great. Be a part of a local church. Maybe this is your church. You come here. Be a part, because the church does something that no one or no other organization or no community or gathering does. And these are those 4 things. The first thing the church does well is it informs our conscience. It's amazing. I avoided so many moral and ethical landmines. Total destruction of myself because of the influence of the local church. I remember my first big memory of influence, of life-changing influence, was my 7th grade year. Our church was taking us to summer camp. And growing up, 7th grade was the beginning of middle school, 6th grade was still elementary. So I remember going to my first summer camp. It was called Big Stuff. Anybody ever heard of Big Stuff? Man, okay, all right. So Big Stuff's a camp in Panama City and Daytona. It's still around. It's huge. Massive, massive just gathering of teenagers every summer, all throughout the summer. And I remember going, and again, I'm the Baptist church. So my Baptist church had a piano, had a guitar, had some electric drums sometimes. It had like 13 people across the front of the stage singing, and then occasionally people in robes in the back. We call that a choir, okay? And so, awesome. Okay, so we had that. And I remember I grew up, I loved worship. I loved music. I could sing from a hymnal. I knew what pages we went to. I knew how to read them, like what stanza or what lines we're going through, because I had been led my whole life that way. So that was worship. And we get to Big Stuff, and Big Stuff is this massive conference room that holds 1,500 to 2,000 students. And then there's this massive stage, and there's lights, and there's this band on stage, and they're playing music that's literally vibrating the building. And I remember thinking, this is the coolest thing where has this been my whole life? It was just this experience, and worship was different. And in my church experience, nothing's wrong with this. We would sing standing still, being led, We all ever done that? Okay, perfect. That's how it was an experience, and nothing wrong with it. That's what I knew. But in this arena, I was invited to something, and I'm like, man, I've never seen students sing like this, and I didn't know we could sing like this, and it was just an experience. And so I'm just enthralled by this moment. And then this guy gets on stage, and I remember who this guy was. And for the first time in my life, he said something that shook me to the core. He taught me this thing that it just hooked, like a fish hook that just won't ever let go. He said this, hey, character is who you are when no one's watching. Now, to a 7th grade student, I had no earthly idea how this one message would shape the rest of my life. It would create so much tension and turmoil in my 7th grade heart and mind, in my 8th grade heart and mind, in my 9th, in my 10th, in my 18, in my 19, in my 20-year-old, into my 40, now 1 heart and mind. That quote to this day ruthlessly works in my heart to remind me of the life that I'm called to live. One statement. Who you are when no one is watching is what character is really about. This desire in me was flamed to always fight. Fight to be who God created you, not who you want to be. Fight to do the right thing, even though you desire to do the wrong thing. Fight to love people more than yourself, even though you're deeply selfish and care about yourself more than others. It literally drew me to this place where I was constantly fighting to be more like Jesus because it informed my conscience. The church also does this. It instills a sense of purpose. Just think about it for a moment. The church was always teaching me that I was created on purpose, for a purpose, though I was not the purpose. It was like this humbling thing. Hey, you're created on purpose. You're not a mistake. You're not a mess up. You're not less than. No, in fact, you have a great creator who loves you and created you for a purpose. You are on purpose, but you're not the purpose. Your purpose is to be for his purpose. The church was always reminding me, you got this. You have the God of the universe in you. He who is for you, Chris, is greater than anyone who could be against you. This encouraging reminder that God, you know all things. You know the numbers of my days. That nothing happens without questioning. You don't fall off the throne on mornings my life falls apart. The church is always reminding me, hey, you have a purpose. The church also served as a window into God's activity in the world. The church opened my eyes that God exists outside of America. Do you know that? My junior year in high school, I went on a mission trip to Brazil. Me along with 50 other students, a whole bunch of us in yellow t-shirts. I remember the day that we pulled into the pickpocket of the world, Sao Paulo, Brazil. All of us American yellow t-shirt tourists walked in, holding our money underneath our clothes in these body vests because we were so worried about losing it. We pull in and we roll out of this beautiful city, and it's like, this is just like our country. Like, nothing's different. About 10 minutes out, our bus hits dirt roads that have massive sinkholes. The bus is going to fall over because we're like, we're going to die. And I remember like getting out into the country, the bush, and I remember seeing monkeys for the first time. Like, they weren't in a zoo; they were swinging from trees. As we went, they went. I remember seeing people's houses. They weren't houses; they were huts, like partially finished huts. Some had sticks. Some were made of like clay. Some were made of bricks. Some had sheet metal. Some were like tarps. Some had tree branches. Some were more like tents. And the further out we got, I saw more and more people living on less and less and less. I remember pulling into the area we were staying. We were building a playground and a soccer field for this community. I remember every day we would get up and we would work. Some of us would go to the hills and we'd take like shovels of grass to bring back to create the field. Some of us were cutting down timber and wood to make this playground. But every other day we would have a little church service where we'd get to gather with the community. And I remember going to what they said was a church. It was a room about the size of this, but it was a rectangle. It was more square off. And you walked into this church, but you never really felt you walked in because there were no walls. There were like these like little like concrete kind of walls that were maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and then there were these posts that went up to like a tin roof. But it was open air. And we happened to go to Brazil when it was winter, which was really cold, and they didn't have heat, they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have fans. It was just, like I could see the community around us. But this little church packed out with people, and I remember this guy got up, and the first thing he did was prayed, and he prayed in Portuguese, and I didn't know much Portuguese, still really don't, but I knew maybe 1 or 2 words, like he said God somewhere in there, and I think he said amen, because that's how you finish prayers, right? Amen. And then they began to sing. And these people that I know where they live, I know what they got, it's kind of on display, like they don't have kitchens, they cook their food in front of their house on an open flame. Like I've seen what they've lived like. I see what they have as a church, but I watch them worship. And the joy that came from these people's hearts, I'm like, man, like they've got way less than I've got. And man, they're just as passionate, more passionate about the God that I serve. They're worshiping the same God in a different language. They're praying to the same God in a different language. They're reading the same Bible, different language. And man, they are grateful to a God who has changed their life. The church opened my eyes to what he's doing, not just in my little bubble, but around the world. The church also taught me to be generous. It was so interesting growing up as a kid, that same church that I grew up in, my parents actually still go to. And this church was like all I ever, I mean, when I think of church, I think of blue carpet and blue pews, okay? I think of how many naps I took in that place. It was, you could sleep good on a pew. But the thing that I remember more than anything was that every single Sunday, I'd sit with my parents, and there'd come a point in time in the service where a guy would get up and he'd say, thanks for worshiping with us. And he'd share a story about how generosity has changed someone's life. And then they would have the deacons come forward, and they'd be holding these gold pans with a green inlay, and they'd pass out these little trays. And I would watch, moments before this, my mom would pull out this rectangle looking thing. They called it a checkbook. Some of you will never know, but she'd take out and she'd write on this thing. And it was every single week, she'd write a check, tear it out, fold it in half. I never really saw the amount, but they would take that check, fold it, and put it in the offering plate. Every single time I watched my parents give. When I think back of my childhood, when I look back, there's times that I can recognize and just realize, oh, I bet it was tight during those months. I bet financially my parents felt a little strapped. There were moments where I look back and I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe we were poorer than I thought we were, But during those times, my parents didn't stop giving. You see, my parents in that church taught me that generosity is the life that you want. My parents taught me without always speaking this, by sitting in a pew, that they chose to live their life open-handed to God. And that even in moments where maybe financially it was hard, they still wanted God to know, like, you have access to everything. You are my everything. I'll give first. My parents instilled in me, like, the life of a follower of Jesus is a generous life. And I got to see that week in and week out, all the days of my childhood growing up while sitting in church. If anything, I want you to get this morning. The church is God's agent of transformation. When Jesus spoke to Peter long ago, he says, upon you, Peter, I'll build my ecclesia. I'll build this gathering of people, and this gathering will last. And this gathering of people, they will be the agent in which I use to change the world. This church will be the conduit, that the world will know who I am. They'll see me and know me because of the church. And for this reason, we, LifeBridge, we must be a church that's focused on mission. We must work, we must challenge ourselves, we must commit to always thinking about the next generation. And for clarity's purposes, next generation doesn't always mean kids, okay? Next generation means what's the generation behind you? For hypothetical purposes, if you're without kids, your kids are grown up and gone, okay? The next generation is the generation of people experiencing empty nest. They're thinking about their world. Some of them are excited to kick their kids out, and some of them are like, I don't know if I can live without my kids. You've been there, done that. And you can speak life into them. You're going to be okay. You're going to love it. It's going to be amazing. Amen. And then so on and so forth. There's a generation ahead of me. Your kids are all older. You can remind me that, hey, it's going to be all right. You're going to make it. It's worth it. There's generations behind me that have babies, and they're like, will I ever sleep again? Yes, you will. One day your kids will bathe themselves. They'll go to the bathroom all by themselves. They won't need you at all, And so on and so forth. Each generation is pouring into the next generation. We must have a church that's always focused on the next generation. That's the only way we will ever make it. But more than that, I want you to realize that our city needs a local church because what the church stands for, like what we believe. There's a guy by the name of Philip Yancey. He wrote a book called Vanishing Grace. And he provides an argument that the church, the ecclesia, it's the strongest argument for dignity and human rights. He says the church should be the loudest voice in dignity and value of every human being. He said it this way. He said, human rights, civil rights, women's rights, minority rights, animal rights. The success of these modern movements, and I love that he puts modern because these movements did not exist long ago. The success of these modern movements reflects a widespread empathy for the oppressed that has no precedent in ancient world. For any history buffs, if you were to look back in history, there weren't these movements for the oppressed. You were either oppressed or the oppressor. Like, that's just how it was. And there wasn't this person saying, hey, we should value these people. No. It didn't exist. He goes on to say this: classical philosophers considered mercy and pity to be character defects. So someone who actually had compassion, you have a character defect. Something's wrong with you. Not until Jesus did this attitude change. He goes on to say this: it was Jesus and his followers, the church, that insisted everyone is an image bearer of God and that they have dignity. It wasn't until Jesus that we begin to see everyone is valuable, that everyone deserves dignity, that everyone should have compassion and care. It wasn't until Jesus where we taught that we should love your neighbor as yourself. Think about it. Who inspires you to exercise self-control for the benefit of others? Who instructed us to do the one thing that if everyone did it, it would change the world? Jesus said that. No one else was speaking this. In John chapter 13, it says this: now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. We are the ones responsible for carrying this mandate to the world. Our city, our neighborhoods, our schools, our state, our nation, our world, they need the church functioning like the church was built to function. A church is on mission with the mission of Jesus. In that first passage in Matthew, he lays out the greatest commandment, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And then he says the second is equal. Love your neighbors yourself. And he says on this, the law and the prophets, they all exist. He actually positions these two things, love God, love people, as the definition for everything that Jesus exists for. And he says, you go and do likewise. As I have done for you, you go and do. This is the mission. But there are so many Christians who are content. And I don't say Christ follower. Every once in a while you'll hear me exchange the two words. Just to be honest with you. A Christian is someone who believes in Jesus. Believes that he is who he is and who he says he was. That's a Christian. A Christ follower is someone who believes but yet is trying their best to do what God teaches us to do. There are so many Christians who are content with just consuming. They're okay to attend church. They're okay to go and listen and take in what makes them feel good or what makes them feel better about themselves and then just go. Across this nation, there are so many people who attend church because my parents did it and I probably should do it and I want my kids at least raised in it. And so I'm just going to do it because I think it's the good thing to do. And they just consume. They come in, they take in, and they leave. The church will not exist. It will not have the influence that it's supposed to have if we simply consume. We must become people who contribute. When I think about this church that you're sitting in today, as I work with banks to expand this property, I find myself amazed almost daily that we got to build this facility because it was built on the time and the energy and the money of far fewer people than we have here today. There were so few people who were extremely busy, overwhelmed with so much to do, but they made time. They made it their mission that there would be a church on Montgomery Crossroad that would be a light in a dark world. In fact, many of you are here today. Many of you are here and you pour out then and now. You give generously, sacrificially. You serve and give to those around you. To you, thank you. We would not be here today if it weren't for you. But there are some of us here today that first we should thank the people who have come before us and help provide and set the course for our church. But there's some of us here today who it's time to stop consuming and it's time to start contributing. It's time to start playing your part in the mission to know Jesus and love like him. There's some of you sitting here today who God has wired you, gifted you. He has taken time and energy to pour into you exactly who you are because he's going to use you to change someone else's life. And maybe, just maybe, that life is here at LifeBridge. Right now, in 70% of our building, it is being overtaken by helpless little infants, dangerous toddlers, know-it-all preschoolers, and the next rulers of the world in elementary. And what they need most is another adult, another college age, another high school student who says, I'm going to try to look like, love like, and serve like Jesus, so that you have another influence in your life of what it looks like to follow Jesus. We need that generation to see more people who are trying to follow Jesus. What's keeping you from saying yes? What's keeping you from serving? I should be really honest with you. This church is lean on staff. I was talking to some friends recently on our budget and just planning for this year, and our church is bigger than a lot of churches in this area. Our budget is a third of theirs. And they've got like 20 plus people on staff. We've got 5. This church functions on people who serve. And we're growing. You can look around you. There's not many seats left. And that means if there's not many seats here, it's crazy back there. What's keeping you from saying, yes, I'll do this? What's keeping you from trying? What is in you saying, oh, you're too busy, you ain't got time, you don't know enough, what could you offer them? It's amazing how many quotes come to mind from Pixar or Disney movies. I want to say, Silencio, Bruno. Silence that voice that's saying you can't. You shouldn't. Because there's somebody here who needs you. They need your time, your energy. So I'm going to ask you, would you be willing to serve? When I say serving, there's all kinds of places. You can break things in here by pushing buttons. That's why I'm not allowed in that little booth back there. There's people on stage in here. There's a whole crew of people who work from the parking lot to the entry of this church. There are people who are constantly managing and watching how many seats we have available. There are people who check in kids. There's security. There's a kid's environment. There's babies that need to be held. There's elementary kids who need to be listened to. On Sunday nights, this building is overtaken by middle and high schoolers. They need somebody. more than their parent saying, I'm trying to follow Jesus, it's worth it. We need small group leaders, people who open their home up to lead. And just, there's seasons for that. But there's a place for you here. What's keeping you from saying yes? What's holding you back? I encourage you to silence that and scan the QR code in the seat back in front of you. When you get the QR code, it opens up this thing called Flow Code. It's LifeBridge. You'll see this thing that says Connect Card. When you open up the Connect Card, like the first thing it asks you is, are you interested in serving? It lists out a whole bunch of things. Maybe, just maybe, you need to just make that choice today. Like, click, and one of our team members will follow up with you. If you forget everything I've said this morning, just hear me say this. We need you. Like, you're desperately needed. God has poured into you a purpose. The local church should be reminding you, you have a purpose. Like, you have a mission. God didn't just bring you in like, fend for yourself. No. You have a part to play. And we would love for you to help us play that part here, to love and care for someone who would change their world, change their family tree. Their generation could be completely different because you said yes. Would you please say yes? Help us as we grow and care for more people, as we open the door for more people, as we park more cars of more families. Would you say yes? Let me pray for us. Jesus, thanks for the day. Thanks for the mission that you created for us, that you would build a church, a movement of people who would reveal your kingdom to the world. That Jesus, through your teachings and through your life, we would be the conduit at which you choose to use to help others know you and follow you. God, this morning I pray that you would give anyone in this room the courage that's wrestling with the tension of whether or not they can say yes. God, if they're struggling with busyness or overwhelmed with tasks and to-dos, or they don't know how to offer or what they can offer, God, would you give them the confidence just to try? That maybe, just maybe, their yes is not to pour out knowledge, but maybe it's to receive. Maybe it's to be present for somebody else. God, would you give them the courage to take the next step? Jesus, would you remind us often that this church is a mission and that we need to stay laser focused on leading people to know you and love like you. That our world, our community, our city would know what it means to love others, to serve others. God, help us look like you to our community. We love you, Jesus, and you're our prayer. Amen.